Good evening, Mayor and Council. It is now 7 p.m. and we are live on Zoom.
Thanks, Ben. We're waiting for the mayor to come back.
Good evening, everyone. Let's start up. This is a workshop. And as a workshop, there is no public comment, although public is welcome to listen in. I'll just do a quick roll call. So I see all council members, Molly, Jeff, Amber, Paloma, Pam. Dan is not feeling well and is excused. The city administrator is on vacation. I sent him away, insisting he leave for a while now that the firehouse is done. So he's excused. The city attorney is here in person. Our usual friend Jeff Sims is also ill, I hear. So he's also excused, although he's not in our roll call.
I hope he's feeling better soon.
Yeah. All right, so let's do our stuff. First one, is there anyone online like Susan Tucker?
I'm here.
Hey there, Susan. The first three items involve you, so the first two are promotions. One is Christine Marino. Let's start there, okay?
Yes. So I'm requesting to promote Christine Marino to Principal Account Clerk. She currently holds the title of Senior Account Clerk Typist, and she's been with the city for over 11 years and is an invaluable part of the finance department. And she's, I'm not sure how much detail we usually go into regarding promotions. Do you want me to read my whole memo to the city administrator?
No, I would summarize it. We've got the memo, so I think most of us have looked at it.
Okay. Basically, Christine is a right hand to me, and she has worked very hard, and she has a tremendous work ethic, and we are, especially with the upgrade of the utility billing system, she's an integral part of that, and she has taken on so much over the last couple of years, and I'd like to promote her to this new title. As she is doing those type of duties now.
Yeah, and Suze, if I can ask a quick question. So just
Sure.
looking at the memo and from what you're hearing, it sounds like this is not necessarily an open role that we're filling, but that it is, it says it's a reclassification, so.
It is.
Okay.
We didn't currently have that title open to us. What the process is, we list all the job duties that she's responsible for, and we send that to Dutchess County Civil Service. And say, is it this title? Is this Principal Account Clerk? And they agree that it is. So it's called a reclass. So we will be putting her in that title provisionally, and then she takes a test.
Okay, so essentially this is aligning this person's responsibilities with the work that they're doing at this point in time and making sure they have the appropriate title. Thank you for the clarification.
That's correct, and also what she will be taking on going forward.
Okay, thanks, Susan.
You're welcome.
To that last thing you said, Susan, can you speak a little bit to some of the, and you mentioned the memo, some of the additional responsibilities that you plan to have her take on when she has this new title?
So the utility billing system that we are integrating right now is much more complex than what we've had in the past. Will it be absolutely user-friendly and useful to customers and residents? But she will be spearheading that. She's also trains new staff. She's really taking over more and more duties that are currently on my plate. Anything I can give her.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I will add, since I sit in the front office once in a while, that Christine's the one that's kind of been there throughout. We've actually had turnover in all of the other seats up there. There's a clerk and a deputy clerk that handle a set of tasks that are specific by statute that a clerk has to do, like births and deaths and licenses. And then Christine's got almost everything else. There's someone at the front window as well in that group, but she's been the one that's been there throughout, and she's always nice to me too. It's like So,
I've also had several interactions with Christine, both like just personally renewing licenses and things like that, and as a council member, and she's always been very helpful and professional. And we had some weird hiccups with my dog licenses, and she was able to get it sorted out really quickly. So, yeah.
okay, everyone good with this? So this is appointing Christine to the position of Principal Account Clerk, which is a title above the current Senior Account Clerk Typist. I don't think I've seen anyone type except on a computer keyboard in, I don't know how long it's been. But anyway, those are the titles. All right, that's one. The second one is for Jen McGuire for Senior Account Clerk Typist. And Susan, you're also going to tell us about that.
Right. So Jennifer has not been with us for quite as long. She's been with us for about a year and a half. She was hired as an account clerk typist, and she first worked upstairs in the front window. The accounts payable position became available, and she has been in that position for about a year, and she's really taken it over and really made it her own. We were having a little bit of issues there, personnel-wise. We were getting behind in some of our bills. She has really moved us forward, and she has quite the financial background, so she's a invaluable member of my staff as well, and I would like to promote her to Senior Account Clerk Typist. And the typist part of that is very antiquated, yes.
Okay, and then I would just add, Jen came on, and of all the people that came on, she actually really quickly either already knew what she was doing when she got there, because she's done other things, or just learned faster than anybody. So I'm very appreciative of her work.
Me too.
All right, everybody good? That's two. And then Susan, are you also going to take us through the proposed budget amendments for this year's budget?
Yes. So the first amendment is we had to upgrade our telephone system at the DPW garage, and this is the amendment that would cover that. It was $9,022. And that would be transferred to purchase of equipment from contingency fund. The second amendment is for our planning board consultant. There were some additional costs this year. I know she did some work for the council. There was also some transitional costs from the old planner that was some additional charges that we weren't expecting this year. Just more work in general than we anticipated. So I anticipate 15,000 would get us through the end of 2024. And we had that money available in planning studies. The next budget amendment is for some accumulated and unused time being paid out to a resigning employee, and one employee that went from CSEA union to the PBA union. So time is accumulated and paid out differently. So the way the most clean way to do that is pay out their time through the CSEA union and start them new in the PBA union. So that's a severance pay retirement there, and it's coming from contingency retirement. The last budget amendment is, if you haven't noticed, we have been doing quite a bit of additional work through our highway department, especially Dave Way and Sean DeToro. They've renovated different areas in City Hall. They did the men's bathroom on the third floor. They improved the finance office. They did some ADA ramps. They've also been working on milling and paving. We've assisted the firehouse in some of the renovations and moving materials that needed to be done there, and cleaning up of various city areas. So earlier this year, Central Hudson gave us a lump sum to do the milling and paving that they needed done, and also there was some additional funds there. We'd like to use these monies to cover those additional overtime costs in the highway department. Also, the stairs outside, we had some additional costs with that, with our construction observation, which is Anthony Tomaselli. So anything that he used to oversee the steps, we charged to that highway overtime line. So that would be covered by the Central Hudson additional revenues.
So I just got a couple questions. So
Sure?
the consultant one, just so you know, we always had a good deal from John Clark. So he basically had retired and we were his only client. So he gave us a better deal in terms of the hourly rate. Our new planner has more of a market rate and also just has had extra hours because a little bit of getting up to speed, but mostly the Route 52 committee. So I just wanted to add that comment. And then on revenue from Central Hudson.
Wait, so that's the planning studies?
Yeah.
For
So
it's
that's-
dedicated to Route 52, the time that the consultant's spending on, okay.
Yeah, pretty much. And, and we knew that going in, but we didn't put it all in the budget because she was just hired on at the end of last year or so. And then in terms of the overtime, are we expecting the revenue item to cover that from Central Hudson? Is that how you're setting it up, Susan?
Yes. So we have a certain piece that covers the actual materials, and then there was in excess piece of it as well. So we're using some of it to cover the overages in the highway overtime.
Okay, great. That's all I got.
Susan, what's the remaining amount in the contingency fund after these transfers, if they took place?
That's a great question. We have about 32,000 in the regular contingency line, and we have 36,000 in the contingency retirement line.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right, so that's
All right.
that. Next item is just an update on the Fishkill Avenue Concepts Committee. I see JC here. Is your cohort in crime online? Natalie, are you online? Somewhere?
I am.
Oh,
Good
there you
evening,
go.
everyone.
Cool. Would you come up and use the mic so that way we can publicly make it available too? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you both for coming.
So we're going to share some slides. And Natalie, do you want to start? Anyway, thank you for having us, and we'll start right now.
Yeah, so I think JC and I, we wanted to present, and we're asked to present a quick update on the Fishkill Avenue Concepts Committee and what the committee has been doing thus far. So I'll start with a little bit of kind of the structure and the logistics, and then we'll go through and kind of show you some of the items we've been working on. There's, I think we don't have the final report yet, but we just wanted to update the council on what work's been done so far. So just as a reminder, the committee has been meeting since March of this year. So we have had 9 meetings so far. We meet the first Wednesday of every month, and those meetings are open to the public. We were moving around and doing online, offline in the beginning, but now we're doing all of our meetings in the chambers that you're in tonight, so kind of just keeping it consistent. And then JC and the rest of the committee have been very diligent about each meeting. A different member takes the minutes of the meeting, and then we've been posting those regularly, no later than a month after the meeting on the website. So if you weren't able to watch or attend any of the meetings, you can go back and kind of see, and they're pretty detailed minutes. So those are all available on the Fishkill Avenue Concepts Committee's page on the city's website.
Natalie, could you maximize the page?
I was just going to ask if you could go into presentation mode. I can't see anything.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Is that better? Okay. So, at the very beginning, I think we kicked off with a lot of public engagement. I think the theme of this presentation that we'll be going through is that the committee has been doing a lot of work to evaluate existing conditions firsthand, right? I think there was a charge within the memo that formed the committee about items that should be looked at, but the committee wanted to make sure that we were throwing the widest kind of net for that and speaking with the public and getting input on all the items that everyone felt we should be looking at. So this is just kind of an outline of what we've been doing to engage the public. Throughout the summer, we did a number of kind of pop-up visioning tables. At the Strawberry Festival, we did a few at Trax, which is within the study area, kind of during the weekday to catch workers or folks who were maybe coming to the area for work, as well as on the weekend. And then we did an online survey for folks who weren't able to attend any of those kind of in-person pop-ups. And then we've been doing interviews as well with stakeholders, specifically property owners and property owners within the corridor, as well as developers in general, to try and think about impediments to investment in this area. There is still planned forthcoming public engagement once we have draft recommendations and concepts. The committee does fully intend to do another kind of, maybe it'll be more of a town hall style meeting or open house to get feedback on those concepts as well. But we're right in the middle of drafting recommendations and concepts right now. So we don't have a date set for those yet, but we hope for those to be kind of early next year. This is just a sketch of like a lot of the public engagement involved identification of issues and opportunities, challenges and opportunities within the corridor. So we first did the exercise, as you can see in the photo on the right, with the committee members themselves. And then all those pop-ups and engagement that we were doing out throughout the summer, that's where we were kind of collecting similar information from stakeholders and residents. So this is kind of what we'll go through real quick. This is kind of, just a quick overview. We're not trying to kind of dive into anything in detail because, like I said, the committee is still working on what our exact recommendations are going to be. But this is the work we've been doing to kind of get there. So we just went over the issues and opportunities mapping. One of the foundational work we've been doing is kind of identification of view sheds within the corridor and mapping those. So a lot of this work was led by one of the committee members, Nick. So he kind of walked the corridor, identified view sheds, and then captured and cataloged those. Dutchess County, I have to give a shout out to Dutchess County Planning and Dylan Tuttle. They've been really helpful for the committee in doing a lot of our mapping work, our GIS mapping work. So we got a land use map from the county that is based on property class codes from the assessor's rolls, and then members of the committee worked to kind of ground truth those and make sure they were accurate. We've also been obviously trying to look at this corridor and development in this corridor, but thinking about it within the larger system of development in the area. So this map was done by one of our members, Garrett Duquesne, identifying kind of other development that's happening in the region and how can we be thinking about that with the connections and improvements that we are planning on recommending for Fishkill Avenue. There's been a number of corridor walkthroughs by the committee members. This is just kind of documentation from one of them. This was led by Olga and Yvonne from the committee, where the committee's kind of broken up into two subgroups to start out with, a zoning subgroup and then a complete streets. And so Olga and Yvonne, on part of the complete streets, they walked the full corridor and documented kind of sidewalk conditions, impediments to pedestrian way or lack of sidewalk, and did a really thorough job kind of mapping that, and then also then making kind of maps like this to recommend where there might be opportunities for improvement. And this is, JC, I think this is where we start getting into some of your stuff, so I'll let you jump in and take it from here.
Thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to preface what I'm saying by just saying, in general, we've taken, as I said last year, I wanted to sort of have a listening tour. I wanted to understand the conditions, almost like a forensic scientist would just sort of understand the conditions before I came to any conclusions or we came to any conclusions. So we've listened a lot and we've studied a lot the existing conditions. So this is a slide about potential connections, because we've been also looking at potential connections to support Fishkill and the rail trail, which is a big part of our look. But in general, we've been looking at connections to Mattawayan. We've been looking at spaces for public space, we've been looking at the street itself, we've been looking at setbacks for zoning, we've been looking at everything, and that's been, sort of discussed publicly. So we're looking at everything. This is specifically about the connections. So as you can see, if you could go back, Natalie, to the first one, just real quickly, we've identified 6 potential connections that are from the left to right, starting with the Pedigo location. It's in the orange. Then the next one is the Central Hudson location. Sort of more user-friendly connections. The next one is after Mavis car. Not Mavis. Is that Mavis? Yeah.
Yeah.
The car dealership, there's potential connection there, which would require maybe steps and a ramp. The next connection is at Lanks to the rail trail. And then there's really, it's harder to make a connection until you get to the car wash. And there could be a more accurate connection. And then the following night, right before the recycling center. So those are 6 connections that we studied that sort of thematically tie the 2 trails. This is an example of the connection at Lanks that could happen, where you have, those photos were taken at the same time, so you could see where I was in relationship to Fishkill. You could sort of see the gradient drop about 10 to 15 feet or whatever it is. That is a potential connection, but it still would require some changing, elements like stairs and ramps. The next one is Healy Properties, much more challenging a connection at that point, but it is, so there you see the difference. If you could go to the next slide, please. So, Pedigo and Central Hudson, like I said, have lots that are much more user-friendly for connections. So the top 2 photos are at Pedigo. You could see the creek, in fact, behind Pedigo, and that's on the right, the access to Pedigo. On the bottom left is a view towards this lot that is actually owned by Central Hudson, right next to that Airbnb building on the right. That also has a, what's that? Apartment building, okay. Apartment building on the right. That has a connection. You can't see it, but it's there in the photo to the right on the bottom. There, you can literally see the rail trail there. So these are 2 of the 6 that are, we think are very good potential connections. Next slide, please. So here is 2 more connections. Remember I mentioned Lanks, the car wash, and the recycling center. On the top left is a photo of Lanks today without the leaves. You can actually see the creek, the trail, and then I was standing just south of Lanks. There's a connection that I think has potential. All those cars on the MTA lot would have to go, but it has a real potential. On the right, you see the northern edge of the car wash, which has a great potential for sort of a kind of a pocket park or place for the 2 to meet in a kind of triangular space. On the bottom left, you see it from the other side. Again, this is just north of the car wash to the opposite AutoZone. And on the bottom right is the view towards north, towards Fishkill, right at the entrance to the car recycling center. That is again, these are spaces that are owned by MTA that could become public spaces, with some landscaping. So next, please. Again, no, you can go back there. So again, the Healy property, which is sort of in the middle of the car wash and Lanks, is the most challenging connection, and I think it's just challenging. So you can see it's about 30 feet from where the street is. But so the next please. So what we did as part of our efforts was study the actual plans, the actual conditions as drawn by WSP, which is a big engineering firm that was hired by the city to draw up these plans over these past many years, right? What I decided to do here was to highlight, for my own edification, where the highway boundary began and where it ends. So what you're seeing here in the yellow is, on the top at least, you see the boundary between the privately owned properties and where the city's highway boundary begins. The drawings refer to it as highway boundary, but it's essentially where the private lot ends and the public right-of-way begins. On the bottom, you see the same thing.
Sorry.
At the bottom, you see the same thing. So here we're looking at Conklin Avenue, Conklin Street. On the bottom left is Lanks. On the bottom right is the Healy Carvana now. And upper right is the Buddhist institution, and then the upper left is the property that Jordan Hawk owns. Right. So what's interesting about these things, and I found them very interesting, that I learned was that basically Lanks is up against the highway boundary, right? And Lanks actually only owns a little bit past it. So like I said, a lot of cars, unfortunately, that go to Lanks are actually on MTA property. And this is one of the things that I actually discovered, that a lot of the private lots are encroaching on the public domain. And what you also see typically is that the amount of underutilized space, basically there's no sidewalks on the east side or the bottom of the slide, while there are sidewalks on the north or the west. So you see that basically there's a lot of opportunity on the east side. That's what I discovered. And because basically the highway boundary, which varies, does go between about 40, high 40s, about 50 feet typically, sometimes even 60. It varies, but it's all on the drawing, so you can sort of know what you're dealing with. Next slide, please. So the encroachments on the beacons right away, I found it most particularly interesting to see how common and how pervasive it is really on both sides of the property. So on the upper left, I discovered that that's the parking lot at the Romanova former Dunkin' Donuts on the north side. The private lot actually ends about 8 feet to the left of that sidewalk. 8 feet is owned by the city, yet they are parking on the right of way. Opposite that car on the upper left, you see the cars in front of the laundromat. That is largely on the right of way. Same thing on the photo on the right, for example. One of the things I discovered was that shed at the auto shop is actually on the private right of way, just like Lanks is, that when they built it right up to the edge. So all of that space in front of the shed on the right is private right of way, and you can see how cars are parked again in the right of way. In Lanks on the bottom left, again the private right of way is at the face of Lanks, and you see cars in front of Lanks, and even a couple of cars project into the private right of way. And on the right, the Carvana had literally parking spaces drawn into the right of way, which the current proposal for Carvana has now brought them back to the right of way.
Hey, JC, just to clarify, you keep saying private right-of-way, do you mean the public right-of-way?
Public right of way intersecting with the private lots, right.
Right, but
That's
it's not the private right-of-way, it's not a
Right,
private
the
right-of-way.
public right of way, or highway boundary, or public domain, whatever you want to call it, but it's what the city owns. And what the city owns essentially, like, for example, in Carvana, at the bottom right, the city's public right of way is around where the front wheels of that car is. So, or, somewhere in there. But there's a tree behind those cars, and that's sort of where it is. But this is just 4 images, but this happens more than 4 times. And it's something that I think was one of my greatest takeaways, is that the city is basically forfeiting its own domain, and because perhaps over many years, private owners just were able to do that and nobody stopped them, and they didn't even know, maybe, perhaps, that they were encroaching on the right of way. So next slide, please. So these are options that I developed with the Complete Streets Committee. I was listening to John Clark's presentation from a year ago, because Pam mentioned it the other day, and I had forgotten what he said. And actually, he advocated that we have come up with options for consideration. And so what these options show, again, is a slice through the location on the avenue where the laundromat is and where Romanova is. But these are fairly consistent throughout the property. And so what I'm trying to show here is the highway boundary, which you can see labeled HB. It's basically showing about 72 feet from face of building to face of building, approximately 70 feet. Main Street, for comparison, today is about 65 feet, building to building. Main Street today has varying sidewalks between 5 and 15 feet, I've measured. And typically, the street itself of Main Street is about 34 to 37 feet, based on what I've documented. What I'm showing here today on the top, on the two left slides, A and B, is literally what WSP drawings showed in their documentation. They showed a street width just under 29 feet. So that's A and B. And so what I'm showing there is the cars, the curb, if you were to do a curb on the east side or on the south side, because it's technically northeast or northeast, but northwest, southwest, southeast. Anyway, the point is, I was curious where the street would be in relationship to the laundromat and Romanova in this particular case. And what you end up getting, because the laundromat is about 10 feet back from the highway boundary, you get a very large distance from the curb that could be built. And that's at 29 feet, A and B. A and B are slightly different because they anticipate maybe a sharrow on one lane, maybe a sharrow on another lane, maybe a bike lane in that very long sidewalk on the right. But that's basically the plans that were done by the engineers, for your information, show a narrower street than we currently have on Fishkill Avenue, because I was told that encourages reduced speed. So their lanes are less than 11 feet, just under 11 feet, while the current lanes are actually about just under 12 feet. So it's a substantially smaller lane. So Scheme C proposes extending the asphalt by 4 feet. So just instead of just under 29, just under 33 feet, which is sort of what happens, which is sort of what's there now in a lot of places. For example, I measured 35 feet at the car wash. There's 35 feet today. Scheme D and Scheme C proposes one bike lane on the northern side. Scheme C extends that asphalt by another 4 feet, so just under 37 feet, which again is sort of what Main Street is now. So in Scheme D, you could have two bike lanes with a 5-foot lane and a 2.5-foot buffer, 7.5 feet. And the reason why I like the 7.5 feet is because actually when I was talking to John Clark about his thoughts last year, he pointed out that he advocated actually parking on this street because he thought that that would calm the traffic and that you could have a parked car at 7.5 feet width. Typically, 7.5 to 8 feet is what you want for a parked car. And the reason why I like that is because let's say you had Scheme D and you had bike lanes somewhere but not other places, you could actually park cars in strategic places along Fishkill Avenue because you'd have enough space for a parked car. Like, for example, at Mill Street, where you have the rail trail right up against the street, I could see the value of maybe having bikes only on that rail trail, and you could then maybe provide additional parking at that area. Because one of the things we've talked about is having a public space in that area. There's about 100 feet, Metro North owns about 100 feet that's unused, it's not owned by any private entity, and we could possibly use that as a public space. Can I have the next slide? Yes, it's width. From the street to where the private, entity begins, where their street begins, where their pavement begins. I measured it. It's 100 feet, including the rail trail. So this is just a couple of examples, one in Connecticut, two in Florida. But the one on the top right, on the top, kind of shows a wide bicycle lane with, maybe that's 2 feet. But what scheme D would show would be 2.5 feet and 5 feet, which would leave you with a just under 37-foot street. And again, just for context, Main Street today has between 34 and 37 feet of pavement. So it's not like, we're not talking about something even wider than Main Street. But again, another thing, one last second. Another thing that I think was important to keep in mind is, like I said, we tried to take this from a scientific point of view and to provide options for you guys to consider without, and to come up with recommendations based on the evidence that we found, not based on our wish list. Because, like, for example, I didn't know how wide this corridor was a year ago. And when I discovered it, it seemed like an opportunity. But we're not in any of those proposals suggesting to go into the private domain and to buy slivers of land.
Yep.
But anyway, can I get the next slide? So I want to thank everybody who's helped us on the committee. You can see their names there, and we've been working very hard. It has taken a while. One of the things John Clark warned us last year was that if you only meet once a month, it's going to take longer, and we've only been meeting once a month. But we are volunteers, and there's only so much one can expect. But I think we've done a tremendous amount. We have a lot of expertise on the committee, and we've had, I think we've had some good input from people and from experts. We had David Burke, who's a former planning board member, come speak to us. We've spoken to developers, as Natalie mentioned. We are sensitive to all the stakeholders.
Wonderful. Are we, do we have, can we go to questions, or is this the presentation?
Yeah, and we
Okay.
will happy to answer your questions.
All right. I think I have maybe 3 to get us started. So first, the Fishkill Avenue Concepts Committee is split into kind of sub-working groups, right? One is zoning, one is complete streets, and then is there a third one?
No.
Okay,
There
so
are
the
third
2.
issues, but we're sort of working it with them.
Okay. And for those 2 subgroups, if you had to roughly estimate how complete or how close they are to issuing recommendations, just gut, what would you say for zoning and then for complete streets?
Well, I actually asked some members of the committee what they thought we were at, and Nat and I discussed it the other day, but it really depends on what the expectation of our product is. Like, one of the other things we've been doing is we've been reading the Main Street Access Committee. We've been reading the Dutchess report, Dutchess County Transportation Council report on Beekman that was done like 7 years ago. It really is, to what extent are these recommendations, how detailed are they? I think, we could spend a lot more time, but we could also produce something relatively quick. I mean, I believe that our forensic studies, so to speak, or our investigations are largely done. I think I'm much more comfortable speaking confidently about the existing conditions than I was a year ago, of course. I think I understand the site.
Yeah.
One of the things I do as an architect is I have to understand the site, and then, can have more confidence about what I recommend. So I think we are at a point, I think we're beyond 50% of our work. I think I think most of the work has been done. I would say even more than 50%. It's just a matter of now producing the product, the deliverables.
Okay.
I think together we could work harder in the next couple of months to get something more formalized in writing. because a lot of our questions have been answered in terms of, what are the constraints, what are the conditions,
Yeah.
what are the, different goals. So I think, what's feasible, what's not feasible. Yeah, I think we've listened a lot, and I think we're ready to sort of write things down.
Okay. And maybe, maybe everybody else ask your questions, and maybe this is a question for the council for us to discuss. The reason I was asking about that is, when I went to the November meeting, I was very impressed by the group. You all are really doing great work, and I think that should continue. But I felt that what we were seeing maybe from the zoning subcommittee was looking pretty good. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity for the council, as we've raised concerns about the things that are going before the planning board and our ability to shape those, if there is some kind of maybe interim step we could take, allow you all to finish your work, but are there some things from a zoning aspect that we could take a look at really quickly and get into place to minimize the stuff that we absolutely don't want to be happening there? So I'll leave that for us to consider, and everybody else ask your questions.
Yeah, I had the same impression. I mean, three of us were at the November meeting, Pam and Amber and myself, and the Garrett took people through the zoning piece. That sounded, again, I would say further along. And, that's why Amber's asking, could we advance that sooner rather than later, right?
I talked to Garrett today, actually, just about that. I mean, he is a planner in Greenberg. He's got his own deadlines, and he's working on those. But he's committed to working a lot in December on this.
Okay.
He told me, and I think what re-listening to that meeting from a year ago reminded me of of how important the timeliness of our findings could be. Because I was on the Main Street Access Committee, and we took, I think, more than 2 years, and there didn't seem to be an urgency. So, I think we have come to conclusions, but we need to kind of formalize that consensus among ourselves, which is why we didn't want to today, state that these are final recommendations.
Yeah.
But we have generally worked a lot on zoning and other things. I mean, I didn't mention the connection to Matawayan, but we've worked on that a little. So we've worked on a number of things. But I think zoning is something that Garrett and that subgroup can work hard on in December.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll say, I mean, depending on what the rest of the council thinks, I often say that I don't think legislation is ever finished. You should always revisit what you've done and be willing to change things. So I'm kind of also willing to entertain, are there some things that we really feel very strongly about right now? And I'm also willing to say, and then we'll pick this zoning back up later in the year after, if you all need more time. I'm just kind of thinking of like, are there some things that we can all really lock arms on and say, yes, we can agree on these pretty quickly and get this in place so that we can impact the proposals that are coming in front of Fishkill Avenue? And if there's some bigger questions that need a little bit more time, totally willing to have that conversation on the zoning again in 6 months or so if there's more work. So again, I'll kind of, let the council deliberate on what we want to do, but that's an option too. I'm not saying that I have to have 100% final to be able to, maybe put some recommendations in place and then come back and do more.
Yeah, I hear that, and I think, based on what I heard, that's a pretty reasonable suggestion. What I would suggest as a next step is, why don't Natalie and JC and us kind of get together and kind of talk about that issue? Are there pieces of zoning that we could move forward quickly and adopt, knowing that we're going to do some more? And I think that's a good question. And Natalie, does that make sense to you, that we have a discussion and see if there's anything in there like that?
Yeah, and I mean, based on the last planning board meeting too, I am working with Nick's office and Jennifer to kind of do a similar conversation, try and organize similar conversation and feedback with the planning board. So yeah, I think that's absolutely possible if that's something that the council wants the committee to move forward on faster. I think the zoning subcommittee definitely has some solid ideas. They just need to get them down and formalized and get the full committee support, and then we can make those recommendations.
Okay. Yeah, I also had a conversation with John Gunn, who's head of the planning board, about their last meeting, and we talked a little bit about this topic. I might draw him into this too, so let us set up a quick meeting in the next week or two. We'll add Nick. Chris may be back, might not be, but this is a zoning issue, so I think we can get the right parties together. And again, the objective is, are there things we could advance sooner rather than later and break it into parts, right?
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think before, sorry, go ahead, Tracy.
No, again, we haven't had any really input into what the expectation of. That's why we've been studying other reports, but we had generally been anticipating to do one recommendation, but I don't see why we couldn't do a kind of preliminary sort of paper or executive summary or some kind of statement on zoning considerations. From our point of view.
Towards that end, kind of keep in mind that with the Main Street Access Committee, which you also sat on, that they did a full report, and this council and previous councils picked up pieces of that right away, and pieces of that we haven't touched yet.
Right.
So I appreciate having the whole vision is important to know that we're not proposing something now that will run against something in the future, so we rely on the committee to let us guarantee that with any zoning things, but we don't necessarily need a full packet in order to start to move towards the vision that the committee's already working on.
Yeah, and to that point, the Main Street Access Committee actually were making major recommendations with, stop signs, and there was like 16 different recommendations that they had, I think, within a year and a half of the 2 years. Actually, it probably was even like 6 months in, that kind of like those quick fixes are quick things that it's like, we're definitely seeing this. So I think, to everyone's point, I think we definitely could hear what the committee really is, the vision that they're seeing, and if there are things that we have to move forward sooner than later. And then the other thing, does the committee need any funding? Which, I know we just passed our budget, but are you anticipating anything?
Well, I had forgotten also about that part of last year's discussion, and then I listened to it, and I forgot that we might be in a position to ask for help or more help. But the only thing that I think of now that could be helpful to our discovery of the conditions, to be honest, is funds for a licensed surveyor to actually show everyone, it may be in an isolated area or a small area, or just where actually the highway boundary is. Because, like I said, I wasn't aware. Most people assume that the cars in front of the laundromat have a right to be there. Most people assume that the cars at the Romanova have a right to be there. And I think it would really help illuminate everyone's awareness of what the city owns. And to me, as an architect, it's always helpful to have the surveyor, which is a legal documentation. They have the legal obligation to show where the line is. I can't do that as an architect. I'm not legally allowed to legally certify where the line is, even though I pretty much can read drawings and know. But I think a surveyor, paying a surveyor to tell you and everyone and me where exactly they are. I mean, ideally you do the whole strip, but that would be more costly. But you could do a portion of it, and that would just illuminate everyone's understanding of the public domain. Because I think at the end of the day, whatever you choose to do, you should utilize the entire public domain and not continue to let the private sector park their cars on your property.
I'm surprised to hear that. To clarify, though, the WSP drawings do not indicate where
They do.
the city property is,
Totally, they do. And they show things that encroach in.
but it needs clarification through a survey, additional survey?
No,
That was
not
not
a survey,
incorporated?
not a drawing survey. I mean, a stake. I'm talking about a staking a survey, like where, that would be my preference. I mean, if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But like when I build a house, I need to have a surveyor identify where the stakes are that has been approved. But I'm just saying, the drawings show it, I know where they are, but I'm just saying for the community to better understand where in fact that line is at Roma Nova. You know, you could have a tree, you could have grass between the parking of Roma Nova and the sidewalk, 8 feet of grass. It just seems to me it's a shame that we don't know where the public domain is. And now again, it's not to say that the city has to build that, but it would be good to know it so that we sort of think of it as a vision for the future of where green could be, or where even a bigger sidewalk could be one day if a developer develops Roma Nova's property.
No, I totally agree, and I appreciate the drawings that you showed too. And just for clarity on the product of what you're working on, I mean, is there clarity, is there agreement amongst the committee about what the recommendations, what the products are? And I guess in particular, a specific example, it's like you showed 4 really interesting examples of what you could do between sidewalks and bike lanes and sharrows on the streets. Is that what you're going to recommend? Is, you know, the recommendation will be these are 4 options to consider, or are you moving towards this is our one of these is our recommendation?
Well, I struggled with what to do also, but I think after especially listening to John Clark, and I talked to him recently, and he agreed that options were a good strategy, but, you know, at this point, those options are potentially going to change again slightly, but the idea is that I think it's good to show options based on a few constraints. One constraint is I've assumed that the city will continue to build on the north side or the west side, whatever you call it. And so those, and the drawings clearly show that the new sidewalk or the existing sidewalk on the west side, north side, is essentially where it is now. So those will not change, and so those were the assumptions of those drawings. So those all those options have that that assumption within it, that we're not proposing any changes to the sidewalks, either existing or planned in those drawings in these options. We're not suggesting that they move the existing sidewalks.
Yeah, most of the interesting part is the southeast side of the street, right? Because that's where the right-of-way is wide. The northwest side is pretty narrow and pretty much taken up by the sidewalk.
Yes, but there are places, Lee, where you can have 8 foot of grass.
Yeah.
It's not always 8 feet. There are places, like, for example, I learned the dollar store and the Red Pepper Diner, the city sidewalks encroach in their lots. But they've been doing that for years, so I'm sure that's not news to anyone, at least those owners. But most of the time, it is pretty close. And most of the time...
Yeah, but I think, to JC's point, I think there is, the committee just started looking at those sketches as a group at the last meeting. And so I think there is a need to kind of try and take those concepts that the Complete Streets Committee's worked on and bring them linearly down the corridor, right? Right now, they're all at that one space in time between the restaurant and the laundromat. And so I think to the mayor's point and to JC's point is we do have to kind of play those scenarios out a little bit. And I think that will help us refine. So maybe we don't end up with all 4. I think JC also mentioned, I think there's a little bit more in terms of the recommendations that we can give a little bit more detail to the council in terms of if we were to move forward with one of those recommendations, what does that look like along the corridor? Because it isn't consistent the whole way through. So thinking about if you are putting bike infrastructure, how is someone alighting and getting on and off that infrastructure in a safe way? I think something else that I would like, or I'm encouraging the committee to do is we do have really great complete streets experts at the county level who have done a lot of implementation of bike lanes throughout the county. And so right now we're proposing, those scenarios are showing 4-foot bike lanes, which is kind of the smallest you're ever going to want to go on a bike lane. So we may want to look at those and see where there's space along the corridor that those could be expanded and buffered a little bit more, since this is a somewhat high traffic corridor with a significant number of trucks on it. So you are going to want to make sure that the infrastructure we're proposing is safe. So I think those concepts are at the early stage, and I think there's opportunities to kind of refine them, and maybe they get whittled down to a few, a select scenario of a few different options that have been vetted all the way along the corridor.
Yeah, just to clarify, we were looking at 4-foot bike lanes, but those are shown at 5 feet. That's why I said we move it 8 feet, and we can have room for 5 feet.
Yeah.
So, but we have to study, we have to keep studying it.
Yeah, my impression, similar to Natalie, is that the streetscape piece will be in options that you probably will whittle down and kind of work, but you're probably going to remain in options. The zoning piece, I think, is going to be more firm, and there wasn't a zoning piece in the Main Street access. It was very much about parking and some of the intersections, and some of the other uses, but not a zoning piece. I think the zoning piece, again, what I heard was it's pretty far along, and I think it's okay if we start to look at them in pieces, right, and let it play out, and if it's possible, and we'll do a meeting to grab some of the zoning pieces early and start to implement pieces of that. That's kind of how I see it.
The other thing that, just like we looked at Dutchess County's proposal and Beekman Main Street Access Committee's proposal, we are reading John Clark's proposal for a zoning update and trying to see which parts we think make sense, which parts we don't agree with. So that's part of what the work we've been doing, is to read that proposal, because he did have a draft for the zoning update, and he did in fact propose a district called Fishkill Avenue. So those are things that we haven't necessarily said yes or no to, but we're trying to understand his proposal better, so that we don't completely ignore that effort that he did. That's
one additional thing that you didn't touch on tonight, but I don't think you need to, is when we think of both what the zoning is, what kind of businesses or residential or kind of mix of units we want in that area, how parking for cars is going to work. I think one of the things with John Clark's proposal for parking on the street was it did also address the needs for parking, especially for potential businesses. And I know some parking currently exists, but how does that work if it's private, or could it be used for other people for other needs? Like we've thought of it on Main Street, but currently don't implement fully. And so that's something too that I want to just be wary of. As Natalie said, it is heavily traveled by cars. There are people who are going to continue to travel there by car. So as the next, as you think of complete streets, is also where do the cars go that want to stop there and make use of whatever's there?
Yeah, I mean, the photo that Natalie showed, or I think that we put together, that first image, shows a lot of cars. And a lot of cars, there used to be a lot of cars. And, again, I asked John what his thinking was, and again, he didn't agree with everything that we were thinking of, but he did, and we're not necessarily, we're suggesting to park cars everywhere, but that was, his argument was that would help alleviate some of the parking needs on these big parking lots with just cars. But again, that's something that we haven't really finalized, but I do know that he did tell me that he was advocating for no parking in the front of buildings. That was part of the update that he was working on. And so that's something that we're considering as well, as to keep as a recommendation. But we haven't, again, decided that either formally. But that's, again, it's actually a great benefit that the zoning law was already drafted. And so we're trying to just reconsider a year later what we think makes sense with Natalie's input and everyone's, and knowing sort of what we've now learned a year later. But
and I think one of the other big things for this concept, just in terms of like illuminating what the task is before the zoning subcommittee on this specifically too, is, I think a lot of the other parts of the city have the opportunity, there's design guidelines in the Beacon Code that say, must be contextual with surrounding existing buildings, or must be, not in contrast with existing historic structures, things like that. With this corridor, I think this is going to be one of the first examples, one of the first times, I think, in not completely full. I think you have some strong, really design guidelines down in the waterfront area as well. But the committee is, going, and this is kind of the reason why we want to have the conversation with the planning board as well, is I think the design regulations in this section of the code are going to have to be pretty unique for the city, just because you are working with an existing form that doesn't necessarily align with where I think some of the committee and is thinking in terms of future development. So it is a little bit more of this is one of these corridors that I've had experience with when rezoning, is there's what exists and then there's the vision for the future, and there's a little bit of a growing kind of gap there in terms of how you get from one to the other, and there's a transition period, right, that you have to get through. And so I think that's another piece that might not be one of the shorter term recommendations that come to you from the zoning committee, but just so you guys are aware that I think that is another piece that will be coming from this committee, because I think that's going to be critical for being able to realize the vision that we're all talking about for this corridor.
So let me just suggest, if there's any more questions from the council, I don't think we're going to get too much deeper in terms of the answers, right? I think what we're hearing is, more than halfway there, further along on the zoning side versus the kind of streetscape design side. We're going to look as a next step to see if we can parse the zoning pieces into a sooner rather than later. Those are the main things I'm hearing, and they'll probably need more time on the streetscape design issues than the other pieces, right? Did I do okay?
Yeah. And, again, I would just advocate, again, because we're focused on the public corridor, that, and we haven't really, and we are considering options that, any projects that happen on the public corridor, in a sense that happen literally, on the public space, not on the private lot, be considerate of the fact that we're considering options for the public corridor, and so they're sensitive to that. Another just, thing that we didn't really talk about, but it's just the walkability of both sides of the street. Forgetting the bike lanes even for a minute, just having a street defined by pedestrian access on both sides, street sidewalks on both sides. I think these are important to the committee. They're important to me. The continuity of that sidewalk is feasible. Being able to walk up and down Main Street from one end to another, I think people do it all the time. I think people would do it on Fishkill. And I think the opportunity to have pedestrian sidewalks on both sides of the street is an important component that we're considering, strongly advocating for, not with an emphasis to one side only. So that's and just before I forget, we've also, just a couple other things that we've touched in, the connection from the bridge street, from the bridge to Bridge Street, properties between the creek and the rail trail that are currently vacant. We think there's opportunities for maybe public space. May not be hard, may be hard to develop, but public space. I think the idea of dedicating some space, whether it's MTO owned or privately owned, that the city could somehow become a part of, and dedicated to the public benefit, public space, open space. Those are the kinds of things I think we'll continue to develop ideas for and formalize, as well as what happens on the street.
Cool.
Thank you. My overall question had been, we've talked a lot about potential ideas, we've talked a lot about your forensic work and understanding the site conditions, and I think that's all really key and helpful. We've also talked about steps forward, which makes sense to me. My question to you is about taking a step back. Do you feel that you have clarity about what the priorities are that you need to consider in your recommendations, taking into account the conditions that you've identified? Also, perhaps another way into that question is, are there any things that you learned from the community feedback sessions that you think are particularly important or surprised you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, I don't think there was anything that surprised us. I mean, we did get some good feedback at our table lean events, but I'm not really clear what the question is, Paloma.
Sure. I guess I'm trying to understand if we're having meetings that are going to be starting to pull out what the zoning considerations are that we could move forward with. Do you feel that you have clarity about how to prioritize which ones are actually addressing needs that we've discussed as a council?
Yeah, we have, I think, some of those priorities include parking on the private lot in the front, heights of buildings, whether they are residential buildings, affordable housing buildings, mixed-use buildings. All of those topics we've been grappling with. We've been talking to developers, we've been talking to residents in the area, we've been talking to anybody who wants to talk to us. People can come to the meetings and listen. We're not having public participation generally, but we will at some point soon. But I think we are at a point where I think we understand the scope of the issues. We understand what the city's grappling with. We understand the issues of public space. For example, a lot of the district that we are, that is between Lanks and, say, the car wash, that's general business district, that today requires a 15-foot setback. In other words, buildings have to be 15 feet from the property line. One of the things John Clark recommended was that move to 10 feet. Some of us like that idea because it sort of creates it's a benefit to the developer perhaps, but it also sort of helps define maybe a relationship to the sidewalk and doesn't feel like it's all set back. But, even 15 feet is less than, say, some of the buildings that are there now in terms of the relationship. But I think that we're aware of those issues of affordable housing, mixed use. We've been talking to people. We've also tried to understand the limitation, like the developer's point of view, like the development on Conklin, what has stalled that, even though that was approved. There's talk about, what would be incentivizing them to be able to build on the north side. So yeah, we're aware of the view sheds. We're aware of the advocacy for bikes. We're aware of the relationship to the rail trail. We're aware of the affordable housing issues.
I could just jump in. I would, if I just have 1 second. To your point or your question, Paloma, I think the committee, that's why they felt comfortable, I think, after the last round of public engagement, of really moving in and recently starting to move into the recommendations, because I think through the public engagement that the committee did, I think they were kind of felt like they got a little bit of a mandate, and they were comforted by the fact that there wasn't really anything outside of the points that we had already been discussing as a committee that came up through the public. There was a lot of support, a lot of talk about safety, sidewalks, crossings along this corridor. I think that came up, as JC said, like throughout the corridor. There was talks about housing, but not just housing, right? Like mixed-use buildings, and then definitely a focus on affordable housing as well. So I think what I was hearing in your question is like, did we feel like we've captured everything, or the committee understood what the public's feedback was? And I would say, and maybe that's something JC and I can work on, is summarizing those notes that we have from all the public engagement and the survey, because I think they really did fall into buckets that the committee was already focused on. So I think that kind of gave the committee the feeling that they were on the right track with proceeding and focusing on what they were with complete streets and zoning, as well as kind of the connections to the rail trail and a lot of lanes. So I feel like we do feel like we heard a lot of public support for the things the committee's looking at.
Thanks, Natalie.
Any
Yeah,
last
does that
bit?
answer your
JC.
question? Yeah?
Yeah.
I just want to maybe from a 30,000 feet up, kind of point of view, I think my goal, and I think the committee's goal is that we want to propose a vision for the future of a place that you want to go to, not that you have to go to. And so that is sort of my kind of overarching goal, and how we get there still remains to be seen. I think that, before I forget, I think I wanted to thank and congratulate the city on the fire station. I think it's a wonderful achievement that when I first moved here, it wasn't clear how that was going to happen, but there was a process, it took place, and it happened, and it's a beautiful building from an architectural point of view as well. I think that's a good example of how, things take time, and there's a process, and I think we're diligently working on that process together, but I think if we just take a breath and we'll just figure it out together, but ultimately, my goal is to make Fishkill Avenue a place you want to go to, not a place you have to go to.
Okay. Again, I'm just trying to move us along. Is that all right, or are we missing something, or?
I'm good.
All right. I just want to thank JC and Natalie for, all your work you've done so far, and the whole committee. And again, we've got a next step of, organizing a small group session just to talk about that concept of, can we break some of the bits into parts, right? Okay?
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Do we want to handle 5 and 6? We've got a applicant here. We can just jump to 7 and then go back. Is that all right?
I mean,
You wanna-
5 and 6 seem really quick, so.
Yeah. All right, so let's do them very quickly. So item 5 is just the calendar for next year. I don't think there's anything surprising there. I think it's very similar to the calendar last year, right? So it's just the usual meetings, and again, the assumption is that June, July, August would be stacking the meetings so that we meet less frequently in those 3 months, right?
I just had a question about particularly why in March. It's true September too, that there are 5 Mondays in both those months. It's the 4th Monday that's skipped. I didn't know if there was any particular logic.
So,
That's
so
our
the-
code, yeah?
Yeah, it's a code issue, right? So officially, our meetings are the first and third Mondays of the month, and then also our workshops are defined as the week prior. And so the first, if there's a fifth Monday in the prior month, is why. Yeah, I think there was one calendar year where we were running our meetings on the 2nd and 4th. No comment. But yeah, usually it's supposed to be first and third, right? Yeah.
To that end, or I don't know, maybe it's a different end, but on June 2nd, we sort of have both a workshop meeting and a hybrid meeting, given that we have a meeting on the 27th of May and a meeting on June 2nd. Should we be expecting sort of a double workshop, or is June 2nd actually just a regular meeting?
I mean, what's interesting is June 2nd, that means we've got a May workshop at
That's
the
what
end
I'm
of May,
saying, yeah.
right? So I think,
Or do we just skip May 27th?
I think we might see, right? What I would suggest is we leave the 27th.
Mayor, if I might
as a
chime
workshop.
in, what we did this year, I believe, was we technically had the first hybrid workshop or meeting of every summer kind of is in that position. Because if we're following the proper procedures, it's first and third is always meeting, second and fourth is workshops. So we're always going to have that situation where you kind of have a workshop preceding the beginning of the hybrid meetings. We had that before, and it kind of just becomes.
Yep.
Right, but Ben, we would have a meeting on June 2nd that would have a preceding workshop on the 2nd, in addition to having a workshop on May
week before.
27th we have 2 workshops for the June 2nd meeting.
Correct. And I
And-
think maybe what's clearer is just to mark that as a meeting and as the start of that kind of hybrid period, but it's up to the council how they want to proceed with that.
I guess I'm similarly concerned on September 2nd, we don't have a workshop for the September 2nd meeting, which I remembered we somehow worked around this year, but
I'm
I
just
can
wondering if
check,
you need to
um,
indicate it differently somehow.
Yeah, you know, what it might be is that we should scrub the May 27th workshop on the assumption, look, we're going to have a workshop on the 2nd of June, and that we insert a workshop toward the end of August in expectation of the September 2nd meeting.
Yeah.
We could do that. That work?
Fine.
Okay. Yeah, I know, that's always the issue, right? Yeah. Yeah,
So on the August 25th, you're saying it would be
a
a
workshop.
workshop
Yeah,
and nothing on May 27th that week?
yeah.
I'm also open to having June 2nd be a regular meeting and September 2nd being our last hybrid meeting, so we don't have to try and squeeze in a meeting right before Labor Day.
That's a good idea.
That'd work too. All right, so then the alternative proposal is the June 2nd meeting would be a regular meeting, because we've had a workshop prior, and that the September 2nd meeting would be a hybrid. And it's before Labor Day.
That makes sense.
All right, I think that's a better one, right? That work?
Sounds good.
All right, so the proposal is we adopt the calendar with that one change, right? That the June 2nd meeting would be a regular meeting, and that the September 2nd meeting would be a hybrid meeting.
Yep.
Okay, good. One down. All right, and the next one is a local law concerning parking restrictions. Is this you, Ben? You've got some traffic safety items?
Yes, I do, and I'll pull those up for you all
Or
to
Nick?
see as well. Can you all hear me okay?
Okay.
All right, so, can everyone hear me?
Oh.
Can you guys hear me okay in the courtroom?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that I was controlling you.
Okay, so essentially, this is a compilation of a couple different recommendations from the Traffic Safety Committee over the past months, and there's two that we wanted to bring forward to kind of, we think are pretty straightforward, but of course, that's for you to decide. The first of which came to us at a request from the HOA at Roundtree Court. There's a couple areas that they're concerned get very narrow when there's parking on both sides of the street, and it could impede emergency vehicle access. That was reviewed by the committee, including our representative from fire and police. They all agreed. These were the areas that were identified as being the candidates for making no parking. The side of the street and region of the kind of roundabout is indicated in yellow. And we will get specific measurements for the attorneys to put into the draft local law, but for the sake of the workshop, we have it marked with like landmarks such as driveway lines and fence lines. That'll be more specific in the law that you actually would eventually vote on if you choose to move forward with this recommendation. And then the second recommendation is for a loading zone on North Cedar Street, just beyond the existing no parking area, which is marked in blue. The yellow would be a couple of spots that would, I think it's 2 spots that would be marked as a loading zone between certain hours, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays, which matches existing loading zones elsewhere. I believe we have 5 throughout the city, and I think this one is modeled after the one next to Alps. And this was also a unanimous recommendation from the committee as well.
Okay. So the first one is the Pete Skorowitz Memorial no parking areas. And I know
Add a
the
little
street
plaque.
seems fine.
Yeah, and they do have parking. They do have parking,
Lots of places.
lots, well, they even have driveways. Everybody has a driveway. I mean, the only thing in the center, that piece near the number 2, I mean, I know the pool is right there, so you probably had people who like to park over there, but yeah, usually that existing underutilized parking lot is usually empty.
Mm-hmm.
And that was indicated by the HOA as well when they recommended this change. They had noted that they have 2 underutilized lots.
Yeah.
One more so than the other, but that they did have existing lot parking throughout the development that wasn't used to its full potential right now.
Okay, any other concerns on Rountree? All right, let's do North Cedar. That's just extending the no parking to make it a loading zone. And it's 6 to 10, 4 to 6 weekdays only.
Yeah, I was very excited to see this proposal. I've had a couple conversations with various business owners along Main Street with concerns about a lack of loading zones. So I'm curious to see if this engenders anyone else to be inspired to suggest a loading zone in other locations off of Main Street. But this one makes sense.
I just know this road, numerous times I've just seen a truck unloading where you can't even get through.
Yeah.
Rightfully so, you should be able to, so
Yeah.
I like this.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see if this addresses the issue and if there's anything else that we end up needing to be done, but I think it's a great first step. And thanks for confirming, Ben, that it aligns with the hours and operations for our other loading zones as well in our code.
Yeah, and I think the times and then leaving it available on weekends is a really good solution. I will confess that one of the very few times somebody got my voice a lot louder than this was a truck parked in the middle of Main Street and yelling at me for telling them to move. So, right, because that's where they park, right? Because they have no option. So I agree we should try this some more, and I like the option of but only on weekdays, and on weekends it's free game.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. And that
Okay.
it's off of Main Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we good?
Yeah.
All right, so that's those items, and then now we can deal with the 2 for 8 Tyranda. So the applicant is here. I don't know if the applicant's going to take us through it, or Nick, you're going to start, or what's up?
No, I think the council discussed this at the last work session. You heard from the applicant's real estate broker. There was a discussion at the end about potential conditions, and the applicant is here to discuss it. I've shared some thoughts with the council, and I just remind you that the present application is for a relief pursuant to section 223-41.4, the bulk requirements of the FCD that states for good cause shown. The city council may, upon imposition of such conditions as it deems appropriate, allow certificates of occupancy to be issued for dwelling units prior to the non-residential component being completed, and that is the case before you, that the non-residential component has not been completed at this time. So, Mr. Schwartz.
All right, well, thank you, Nick, and good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Brad Schwartz again from Zahran Steinmetz, joined by one of the principals, Barry Cohen. So we are here tonight to hopefully discuss some conditions that could be parameters of an authorization. I did share with your council after the last meeting a proposal or an idea that our client would offer 2 additional one-bedroom BMR below market rate units, and so to incorporate that into the project. As far as the ongoing commercial marketing efforts, we had also talked about providing regular updates to the council, both in writing as well as attendance at meetings in the first quarter of next year. I think when you heard the broker speak last time, he had mentioned that he does expect activity to sort of quiet down as we enter the holiday season, and so that we are committed to continuing those commercial marketing efforts through at least the first quarter of 2025.
Okay. Okay, so now this is on merely the one piece, the certificate of occupancy, and the 2 conditions I heard was to offer up an additional 2 units BMR, and then also to provide regular reports.
Yep.
I got that summarized? Okay. Any council questions, comments?
I mean, I can't imagine that's your best offer on units. So what's your best and final offer on units so we can be done having this conversation every 2 weeks?
So before we do that, let me see if I got my numbers right. If I take a unit and I bring it into the 70% AMI, I'm just guessing as to what the rental impact is, but I'm guessing $1,000 a month. Plus, there's an element of administrative for each of those units. So I'm just kind of guessing $1,250 as the monthly impact. That's $15,000 per year at 5% interest. That gives me a present value of $300,000 per unit. So these 2, while they don't sound like a lot, sounds like $600,000 when I look at it from a present value perspective. That sounds like a lot. right? So I just want to put it in perspective. How are my numbers?
Spot on.
Okay.
Yeah, could you actually follow up on what Lee said in Amber's question? Just give voice as to how you arrived at 2 as opposed to 1 or more than 2?
So it's exactly that math, Ms. Rhodes, and that's the pro forma that the applicant has put together. As you know, there's, the density was fixed. There were 6 below market rate units, and given the math that the mayor just mentioned, the applicant went back and looked at it and analyzed it, and given the site work, the infrastructure cost, obviously rising interest rates and the cost of construction, when you do all the math in the pro forma, the 2 below market rate units is the additional that we could offer at this time. And Barry may be able to shed some light on that.
So, good evening. I'm not very good at this, participating in public speaking, so excuse me for that. But there's one big thing that I want everybody to take into account. This is not the same kind of a project that would be on Main Street. The cost per unit, just for the trail, the retaining walls, is most probably close to $1 million. That's per unit. It's like $15,000 per unit in extra that wouldn't be on any other place in town. That's number one. And the reality is, if knowing what we know about this site today, with the overruns and the cost of construction costs, from when we thought we were going to put shovel in the ground was 2019, and when it changed from 100 units to 64 units to the commercial building, which at that time seemed to be a reasonable built, it's not even in the same zip code. So even giving these 2 units is just putting us in a deeper position of where our recovery is going to be. It's possible that, it's going to be 10 years down the road till we can take out our investment that we put it in over here. And it is and again, I'm not saying it is what it is. We took a risk and we're here. But we tried doing the best we could. We did all the infrastructure for whatever else is going to happen on that site. All the parking is there, paved, all the lighting, all of the utilities, the foundations, and I wish I could build it today. I just can't, and it'd be a shell sitting over there, which is not good for tenants and not good for nobody in the city. That's my opinion. It doesn't mean that everybody shares the same opinion, and I'm just trying to be as, whatever situation I can do, I'm trying. And these are expensive units in infrastructure site. The site itself, the rock that we endured, cost us a lot of money extras. And the interest rate from then, what it was supposed to be until now, it's just, the numbers are just outrageous. And that's where we are. So we need, at this minute, I know that we're committing to give more, but anything more than that is just, being in a position that puts me in no choice, and I can't really do something that I don't know how to do, because at the end of the day, it's just a matter of how much I'm going to be able to carry this project to where it makes sense. So we would like to bring closure to this, and that's our we think very good faith offer of the 2 additional BMR.
And the additional, you said you're going to continue the marketing effort for the commercial space through Q1 of 2025?
Absolutely.
And then what?
We have to revisit. I mean, I know you suggested last meeting that the writings seem to be on the wall, right? But we're going to give a good faith effort. Your council wanted us to do that, and so we went to Brian. He's got the exclusive, so he's blasted it everywhere, and we'll see what happens. If at the end of March, if there's no traction, we're going to I'm sure, come back and have a conversation with the council, but let's cross that bridge then. We're here tonight on the authorization on the certificate of occupancy. I know last time some conversation began to start a little bit about, do we deal with the building now? But we're ready to give it another 3 months of the
Yeah, I
effort.
still have trouble with this deadline opposed upon it. It seems like it puts different negotiators in different positions than they otherwise would be, just on this anticipation that it's going to end, and there's kind of a prescribed expectation of where it goes next. So it's something I still have a very significant problem with.
And so the deadline, right, so this effort started again in earnest, because again, we admitted we could have done more from the beginning, so began again in earnest about 2 months ago now. So, and you heard the broker speak last week, not a lot of traction. It could have been easy to say, you know what, we're done, and let's talk now about converting the building. What we're saying instead is, you know what, we recognize at the end of the year, and we're going to give it absolute best shot for at least 3 more months. And then we can revisit it at the end of March, see how much activity, how many conversations, how many contacts there have been, and reevaluate. So there's no firm deadline. It's just Q1 is what we've been advised, is if there's going to be some progress, that's the time that if we're going to see it, is likely going to happen.
Yeah, that doesn't preclude us from extending. You're just
Not at
saying
all.
you're going to come back.
Yeah, there's no fixed hard deadline.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say probably as an initial shot, I would like at least the first 2 quarters of 2025. So yes, a report from the first quarter, and if you're not successful, then a report from the second quarter, and then coming back to us no earlier than maybe May or later in the summer in 2025, if you want to come with a full proposal.
Okay.
We might call you back. Can you, I appreciate that your real estate person isn't here tonight, but I kind of looking at some of the material, it looks like, we included some loan letters where those who turned down, and you kind of shared this yourself, had concerns about the non-residential component, specifically called out office space as the issue. And there are other non-residential versions of things that are available, like hotels and retail. And so I'm curious, and yet you seem to continue to focus on marketing as office space. And so I'd like to kind of understand more about that, because as we think about this condition, I want to make sure that I'm setting you up and our city up for success as well.
So again, I totally appreciate the question, and I was trying to be very careful tonight to use the word commercial, right, and not office. I know the broker last week may have said office one too many times. I point you back to the brochure that was posted, and it specifically is entitled commercial. In the narrative, the third line, can accommodate a variety of business needs. 2 meetings ago, I mentioned that some of the communications the broker had, while it did not yield to anything, a jazz club, kids play space, a fitness center, a cafe, and also the picture in the brochure shows a gym space. So, Ms. Rhodes, we're not at all trying to box us into traditional office space. It's commercial in the broadest sense, and the brochure itself again says a variety of businesses. So we are not, pigeonholing the breadth of the marketing efforts.
Can I ask, and you might not know an answer to this, is there a reason why hotel is not specifically included? I'm not a real estate expert, but I would have thought that location, that the demand for people to stay overnight in Beacon, that might be a viable option, but I have no idea what goes into financing a hotel, so if you have any insights you're able to offer, that might be helpful.
So again, I don't believe that anything is ruled out. If in response to the listing, a potential hotel operator surfaced, we would absolutely have that conversation. There's nothing that is off the table.
Great, thank you.
With the hotel coming around the corner of the Magnitude Hotel, I, as an investor, would not put in a hotel.
Are you talking about Mirbeau across the river?
That's correct, Hotel might work. We're not in the hotel business, so I wouldn't build it for our use. If we find an operator that would want to do a hotel, we would gladly try to do a hotel. Hotel is good for a bunch of uses. It's good for tenants, much better than an office space for the tenants. So, but we haven't had any calls that this site would be good.
Look at Fishkill, where there's a number of hotels all in proximity to one another. So again, if that operator surfaced, there's nothing that's foreclosing that conversation from happening.
Great. I appreciate you sharing your insight. Thank you. In terms of other conditions, I think another couple that weren't yet talked about was one about the marketing and filling of the below-market rate units before, and I think there are two specific things. One is a contract with Hudson River Housing. I don't know how that works in terms of how you would connect with them, or Lee or Nick, you might have some more insight about how that contract works. We obviously have other people who connect with Hudson River Housing, and how that might work, and I'm thinking of that before we actually issue the certificate of occupancy, to sign a contract with them to make sure that's moving forward. And then for the full council, talking about, and I think we touched on this last time, is do we want actually some of those below, at least some of those below market units to be occupied before some of the regular market rate units are occupied. And so I think those are two other conditions I want the council to talk about.
I'm also interested in having only the below market rate units occupied until there's an additional report. We can set a timeline to that, but I'm most interested in affordable housing being brought online in the city.
Yeah, Paloma, I wonder if so the two BMR units, I want to talk about that a little bit more specifically. So you're offering 2 one-bedroom BMR units. What is the other mix of BMR units? Are they all one bedroom? What are the other 6?
I have it.
4 one-bedrooms and 2 two-bedrooms.
We can't hear you if you don't speak into the microphone.
4 one-bedrooms and 2 two-bedrooms.
Okay. So you're giving us you're offering 6 one-bedroom and 2 two-bedroom total? Permanently as BMR units?
That's correct.
Okay. Could you potentially do 2 more BMR units if they aren't permanent?
Define.
You tell me, this is your problem.
No, when you say not permanent, what do you mean by that?
Meaning that right now, with BMR units for forever until the project is redeveloped or torn down. So I think what Ms. Grant is suggesting is some other period of time, less than
So
perpetuity.
it would then be converted to market at some point?
Right.
So like 5 years?
Well, I wouldn't want the people to be kicked out
I know.
if they're in it.
That's
though.
always an issue.
That's what I was thinking about, is how do you convert at some point, but go ahead.
Well,
What
it
do
could
you
be
want?
upon the expiration of a lease term after X number of years. Yeah.
Again, I don't know how that would work, for the exact point that somebody lives there, where's that expire? Do people move out from workforce? Yes. So it's a possibility. Everything is possible. Again, I'm here to try to get to a solution. So if there's a recommendation that I have to live with, I'll live with it. But I'd rather have it clean. Maybe instead of, I just realized that there's 4 one-bedrooms and 2 two-bedrooms. So I would do 5 one-bedrooms and 3 two-bedrooms. 5 and 3 two-bedrooms. If that's, uppers the ante into, a solution. I think it's cleaner and it's better than having a time frame and going back. To the other point of leasing out these units before we start, I'm just not understanding the logic, because we have every incentive to get every single of these units leased as fast as we could. Everything is revenue. It doesn't matter if it's lower BMR units revenue or the other revenue. They get committed which units are what and what the numbers are. So the more simultaneously that it fills up, and it just makes the building work much, much better for tenants in general. For BMR tenants, nobody wants to be singled out that we're just BMR tenants, versus the idea of having a mixed use is that exactly, that they get the same kind of apartments that the market rate apartments get, and they feel as a part of the building of a regular market rate building. That's my view of that. So contract with Hudson, I mean, plus, there's another one thing, is a big thing, that people don't realize with the BMR units, that it takes even longer than a regular unit. A regular unit,
We realize that.
oh, okay.
And I
So-
think that's sort of why there's been the suggestion of starting now. And have you had communications with Hudson River Housing? Have you signed a contract with them and then start the marketing of the BMR sooner than the marketing of your commercial? Because exactly the point that you've referenced, that takes
I'm
longer.
not sure what signing a contract is, but there's no contract with them. It's just we approve, either they bring us or we give them an applicant to approve. They approve every single every application. That's how it works, from what I understand. And again, unless I'm wrong over how this works, but that's what I understand how this works.
So that would be pretty easy. So it would be some sort of measure of an up and running relationship.
Oh,
It
you
may
have
not
a
be an
relationship.
agreement, and maybe whatever it is, but there could be proof of that, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thought process here, and based on what you're saying, there should be no problem at all, because these units will be rented so quickly. But the thought process here is that we certainly don't want to say, okay, fine, and then have all of the non-BMR markets, rental units marketed and rented, and then the BMR are the last ones thought of. Like, we want to make sure that is the priority of this council, and so that needs to be your priority.
And to tie that into our language and our law, it's related to good cause, that we're giving you a relief in our law, which we agreed and passed in the law. And so we're looking at what is our measure of good cause. And as you're aware, affordable housing is one of the key issues. As is housing in general, we've had people reach out about the market rates, units as well, and wanting those to also come online. So I'm not saying it's just affordable, but in terms of the priorities of the council, affordable housing is one of our key elements. So our discussion here about the number of BMR units, the type of units, and also the how they're brought online is an important part of us meeting our own good cause criteria.
Totally appreciate that, which is why we started the conversation tonight by offering up those 2 additional BMR units. And I think, so Barry has clarified, so with the proposed 2, there would be a total of 8. Just want to just bring us back to where we've been. Total of 8.
I just want to go back to the point of being before coming online first, or simultaneously. We have every incentive as fast as we can rent the BMR units, because
That's great, we love that. We're
But
again
it's-
just saying,
but what I'm
like, the
trying to-
priority for this council is to focus this on affordable housing, so just help us out here, and let's get to a point where we can get the BMR units. We want those first.
And I've reached out to Hudson River Housing, but haven't connected, and I can do so between now and next week and work on language that would implement, as you said, Councilmember Grant, but it's the council's priority to make sure it's the applicant's priority with respect to that.
So I would just be cautious on council members stating the council's priority, as
enough.
opposed to individual members'
Fine,
priority.
that is
Yep.
my individual priority.
Yeah, because I will say I have a very clear priority of every rental unit being rented as soon as possible, right? And I'm perfectly fine with all of them coming online tomorrow.
And again, this is from just an owner. I would want to rent these BMR units tomorrow, all of them, because they are set already of what they are going to bring in. The other ones, we have no idea. That's just something that,
Like I said, it sounds like it won't be a problem then.
Yeah. So,
again, it's not about a problem. Oh, yes, but BMR units takes much longer for Hudson River Housing. They have no reason to move on paperwork as fast as we could move on paperwork. We tried to do the best. And as a matter of fact, we have a BMR unit that was available. It took weeks for them to get the applicant approved or what they brought online. And again, that's just one unit. So when we have more units, it's easier. But
I think, Barry, we could demonstrate the commitment to get the BMR units online ASAP, whether it's a contract, whatever we need to do to enter into a working relationship with the Hudson River Housing, we will do, and we will market everything in earnest, simultaneous. So the only thing we have trouble doing is committing that it will go first in terms of the occupancy, but in terms of the going to the street and the market to let the world know these are available, as soon as we have clarity here, we'll start working with Hudson River Housing tomorrow.
Right, and I totally understand that. I mean, you can't really control the date that somebody is available to move in. What I am asking for is that we make sure that like all of a sudden, we're not just seeing all of the market rentals listed and no activity on the BMR.
Look, if you wanted to, just like we're going to come back and report on the commercial, we could institute a reporting requirement just on the efforts of the BMR.
Yeah, that's what I heard as well. So let me see if I can summarize what I heard. Plus one bedroom BMR, plus one 2-bedroom BMR. The affordable administration in place with the city attorney's job to sort what that means. Commercial marketing with reports each of the first and second quarter of next year, and an update along at the same time on how the rentals are going.
And Mayor, just to clarify, on the reports in Q1 and Q2, would you like that in writing? Would you like us to come appear at a meeting? Both? Whatever the board, the council, I'm sorry, wishes is fine with us.
I'd prefer writing. And did we lose I like the idea of the temporary, like a 5-year additional.
No,
I don't think that that's too.
Well, what they responded with was that was difficult, and they offered up the second bedroom in one of the units as opposed to that option.
I didn't think that was as a response to that. That just seemed like that was a balance in terms of number of bedrooms, thinking that there was an imbalance in the number of 1 bedrooms that was there. I'm still intrigued by the idea of having 2 additional that are temporary, at a 5-year. I don't think, with clarity in the lease arrangements, I don't think that that's a real challenge.
So I'm good with this one.
With the points you made, but not the additional.
Not the additional.
I
I think
still
we're
think it's
asking
an
for
intriguing
trouble
idea.
to do something that expires.
I'm curious what the rest of the council thinks.
Yeah, I'm interested in that idea and understanding, is it difficult just because it's some extra paperwork, or is there a broader concern here that I'm not understanding?
I understand the concern to be that if you say it's restricted to 5 years, that what happens when the tenant who has in the 5th year, they then have to vacate that unit? And that's the concern I'm hearing. Then how do you enforce that?
Well, I guess my other question is, how does that interact with our good cause eviction law?
Well, it would then be legally permitted, I believe, because the restrictions on the rent income would only be restricted for that 5-year period.
Okay.
And so an increase would then be permitted because it's now outside of that BMR.
Okay.
And then you're precluding whether it's a 1-year, 2-year lease, and extensions come into play, and so then is someone going to want that unit knowing that there's going to be a sunset at a certain time period? So I just think there's practical.
Speaking to people who need affordable housing right now, they need housing.
Yeah.
So if they can come into that unit and live there for 5 years at a rate that they can afford and stay in the community that they're in, they're going to take that opportunity. I would take that opportunity.
I would like to say 5 years, or when the 3rd building is built, whatever is last. Or you can't, if the building that has just a foundation, because it wasn't concurrently built as it was supposed to for commercial, if that is not built in 5 years, we should still be having, I think we should have 10 below market rate, 2 of them on contingency of that building getting built. That might give you more urgency to get that building built because you're losing money.
So I would just encourage council to be cautious. When you bandy about numbers of the number of units at what rental rate, I just gave you an example of, switching one to affordable is probably $300,000 of cost.
For a permanent.
For a permanent,
Yeah.
right? Well, it assumes 5% for 20 years as a way of amortizing. Once you say it's 10 years, it's pretty close to $300,000, right? And so each time you up the ante, you're basically asking at some point for a suit. And I would just encourage you to be cautious. And I'm not giving you legal advice, our attorney will do that, but I am giving you financial advice, right? Which is I can count, right? And so, ideally, sure, everything should be affordable.
Yeah.
Let's just make it all free, in fact. And, we'll have lots of people coming. We're not going to solve, the affordable housing crisis in our city, in New York State, or in the country.
I think that's fine. I think I get your point, but I also think that there's a tone in the description, and again, about shutting down ideas and discussion. Your point is well made, but again, it's about tone and both intent on advertising and intent on commitment. we're just exploring this in conversation.
Okay, I'm just saying, be cautious how you put it.
So there is some interest from the council, but maybe not a consensus on the council for these additional units on a timeline. Am I hearing that?
Yes.
From at least 3 people?
Yeah, I'm actually I'm curious to kind of hear your thoughts about it. If we did 2 additional temporary units, meaning they were not permanent, and if you could make that work, and I actually would ask you to come back. I assume you're going to come back to our voting meeting and maybe share then, as we kind of do, if we did a final vote next week, if it makes it there, that, I don't know, I'm actually torn between this, because I do want the affordable units, and I do think that the temporary is an intriguing way to do it, but I want to make sure it works for you, because these units, as I do also agree with Lee, that the units are important. So I appreciate this as an idea we're presenting to you now, so I don't know if trying to hash it out now is the best solution. We all have email, and we will do this again, and we're not voting on anything tonight. So I think if there's a way to make the proposal work, I'm curious to get your thoughts, Nick, assuming you're able to connect with Hudson River Housing. I appreciate it's a holiday week, so that may or may not happen, but to get their thoughts, just at how quickly these kind of units get filled.
Right.
Because I actually don't have any insight into that, and so I think that will also determine, because there is this final condition of how far along do they have to be in being filled to meet our good cause, and I don't quite have enough information myself to make what I think is a grounded determination. So that's where I am.
So I like that idea. I think there's consensus around a lot of what we talked about, and the idea of an additional, on a temporary basis, let us go back and talk among ourselves, and I could always
You can reach out to me.
touch base to
Yep.
Nick. I would like to try to bring this to a vote next time, so knowing that I think we've reached consensus on a bunch.
All of us, I think,
I think we
want
all
that.
would, right? So let us come back on I think that the one outstanding issue is going to be this temporary, right? So let us come back and have some thoughts and share with you.
Yeah, I
on
think
that.
it's, could we do a temporary, how would that,
Yeah.
can we come to a consensus enough? And also the idea of how far along do those then BMR units need to be in the filling process, and
Right.
what makes sense?
Yep, and I'll reach out to HRH and bring you into that conversation as well.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm clear on consensus, or maybe not consensus, but opinion on the council side of what that number of units is, what number of BMR units need to be occupied before we would be okay with market value units being put on the market.
I don't
That's
think
where-
anyone suggested we're going to fill one versus the other. In
Yeah.
fact, what I heard was you can't control when the BMR units are going to be filled, right? And so that's not an appropriate, I really don't think that's an appropriate
Well, that's
Well,
a-
there
condition.
was an
That's a
initial
condition that
discussion,
was-
but, right, there was
yeah.
initial discussion, but then the applicant responded, and I think there's been discussion that that's not feasible, is what they've suggested.
Right, and the applicant has some experience, sounds like you have other BMR units
Right.
in other places, so you've had some experience with this, so.
But that's where the marketing efforts will begin. Again, market rate and the BMR simultaneous, both with the same force.
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of willing to cede on the occupying things. Thinking about it a little bit, it's like, I mean, what if somebody rents but can't move in for 30 days because they have to get out of an existing lease? Like, some of the occupying the unit is, based on the person who's renting it and their specific conditions. So that's why I was a little bit more focused on making sure that those were,
That there are more units long-term.
yeah, and also that, like, it's not like, oh, I just rented out all of the market rate ones and now I'll get to the below market rate ones. Just making sure that there was kind of an even or even more
That
aggressive
they're being done
approach.
concurrently?
Yes, imagine that.
So what is that definition?
There's another one big factor, that nobody wants to live alone in a
In
building,
an unoccupied building.
in an unoccupied building. So it just, the super, all the expenses, it just doesn't
Yeah,
work.
I glean that there's consensus that, I think we're moving towards, that there's not a concern around the sequencing, based on the discussion, correct?
Not a sequence with occupying the unit.
Correct.
Right, but if a quarterly report showed a huge disparity, there would be a concern, right?
Yes.
Right, but
Could-
presumably that won't be the case, right?
Yes, it sounds like these will be rented almost immediately, so it shouldn't be a problem at all.
Being I know it's a holiday week, but it would be nice even if you could come back on Monday with some kind of the communication that you are working with Hudson River Housing and moving forward with, kind of getting your ducks in a row of what needs to be done there, because it sounds like you haven't talked to them at all.
Oh, no, we talk to them all the time. We're involved with Hudson River Housing and other locations.
For this project.
Right now, this project, we haven't done anything in marketing, period, because we have no idea where we are. As soon as we know where we are, we can start doing all of these things.
But it made it sound like you didn't know what you had to do for this project with Hudson River Housing. It would be nice by next Monday for you to have idea.
No, we have an idea, but I've never heard of the thing of signing a contract.
It was just that mechanical was the only lack
It's
of.
not signing a contract, it's an obligation that we have for the BM units to work with Hudson River Housing to fill the units. If they have the applicants, or we can bring the applicants from within of advertisement that we want to fill every single one of these units. They're the same green dollars as the other ones.
But what I think Councilmember Weatherby is suggesting is that we should have those discussions with Hudson River Housing now, clarify, and find ways that you can perhaps do more to get the BMR units occupied up front.
We agree.
Okay.
Before we completely move on, I was wondering if we could get some clarification on the communication received from the building department in regards to the commercial property. I don't know if we can discuss that here or if we need to discuss it in executive session or
Well, there
what
was
the
a-
appropriate steps are.
Yep. So there was a question raised at the last council meeting about whether the developer was in compliance with the language in section 223-41.14 that says the buildings had to be built concurrently, and what was meant by that. And I had said that that's not something for our office of city attorney, it's the building inspector. So in fact, the building inspector had opined on this back in August of 2021. I provided to the council, and the applicant's aware of it as well, a letter from former building inspector Dave Buckley that offered his opinion that the certificates of occupancies could not be issued for residential unless the shell of the commercial was built, the foundation and the walls. The developer did apply for and receive a building permit in November of '23. It was amended and issued again in April of 2024, and construction started on that in July, and the foundation was poured. And for the reasons that you've heard past couple of meetings, they've not advanced beyond that. So the building inspector's view is that they are in violation because they have not completed that, but they have the application pending before this council for relief from that provision. So that if you grant the relief, then there's no violation. If you don't grant the relief, then they have to build before the residential COs are issued, and they need to take steps to actually then build out the shell of the building.
Okay, so this addresses the definition of concurrently, or this addresses the steps towards a CO, or both?
I think both.
Okay, because to me, it makes sense that addressing, receiving the CO from the council instead of from the building department is in compliance with the law, but does not address the ongoing concern of the commercial property not being built concurrently to the definition of the building department.
Well, I think by allowing the residential COs to be issued, you're agreeing that it wasn't done concurrently, and that requirement is then being waived. Otherwise, you couldn't issue the residential because the commercial is not being built. So it's addressing both.
Right, and you couldn't ask for additional consideration you couldn't ask for good cause unless that were the
Correct,
case.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, do we know what the penalty level would be for the violation?
We do. Well, A, it's up to the judge. B, under the city code, it would be $1,000 per day, and each day it continues is deemed to be a continuing violation.
And how many days are we up to at this point in time?
Well, we have to serve a notice of violation, so it would start from when they serve the notice of violation, and until it's cured.
Okay, are we all set? So I think we have some next steps. I think one's on you.
Correct. So
And
I'll
I think
prepare-
there are some on you,
So
right?
the two outstanding is a conversation with Hudson River in the next 2 days, hopefully before the holiday weekend. Nick, we could do it together separately, but let's come back with the council information on that program, and we will come back with an idea on, for some temporary unit.
Two temporary units?
That's what the council's requested. Let me go back and,
So a total of 10 with 2 temporary?
that's
I just-
that's the council's request.
Okay.
Let me talk to my clients, and we'll get back, and hopefully be in a position to ask the council to vote on Monday.
Okay.
All right,
Okay, I'll prepare a draft resolution and update the council with respect to those issues.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Happy Thanksgiving.
thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
So just to announce the next meeting, which will be next Monday, December 2nd, it will be at 7. It will be a regular council meeting, and then I will request a motion and a second to go into executive
Motion.
session.
For the purpose of?
To discuss personnel.
Motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel, and after that, we will
Second.
conduct no further business.
And adjourn. There's a motion by
adjourn.
Pam, a second by Amber. All in favor? Aye. Thank you all. Thank you all. We'll get started. There's nobody online that we need, right?